Welcome to Under the Microscope. I am your host, Jenny Germano. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I am excited for this next topic. We are going to be talking about raising the bar, preparing the cannabis industry. Let me start that over. I messed that up. Our topic is going to be raising the bar, preparing for the cannabis industry's next phase. And before I dive in, I'm just going to give a brief description of my background. I got my start working in the cannabis industry in 2009, running and operating vertically integrated cannabis operations here in Colorado. And in 2015, I founded my company, ICS Consulting, and I have been helping cannabis operators across the United States for the last 10 years navigate the regulatory landscape. And let's give a warm introduction to my next guest. He's probably my most frequently appearing guest on my podcast is Alex Herding. He is the founder and president of Red Wolf Risk. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Jenny. Always awesome to be back. Excited to have another conversation with you.
Here we are again, but I'm excited for what we're going to talk about today. And before we jump in, why don't you give our listeners just a reminder of your background in case they haven't
Yeah,
heard
so
about you?
we've been in cannabis similar length. I have a science and engineering background before I got into the cannabis. A lot of worker safety, worked for some engineers, and did a lot of nerdy stuff. When 2009 came around, I got into the green rush out here in Colorado, started growing for patients. 2014, I got one of the first recreational cultivation licenses in Lakeville, Colorado. Designed, built, and operated multiple facilities of all facility types, and have been consulting and have a particular focus on risk management and quality management right now in this space.
Yeah, which is fantastic because that's really kind of going to be the heartbeat of our topic today as we make our way through it. We've just had several conversations. There's a lot swirling around. We are going to be talking about rescheduling and then like where that's going to be taking the industry next.
Yeah.
And we're going to reiterate this. And Alex, feel free to, we don't 100% have the roadmap yet, right? We're anticipating based on federal standards and what other regulated markets have to do when they have to follow federal standards. And that's the roadmap that we're following right now. But obviously that roadmap, it could get updated. And we're looking at this as the industry is entering the next chapter, but we still have several chapters to write in the cannabis industry. The book is not complete. And so we're on to the next chapter. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is that we're seeing this shift towards operational maturity. We have, I would say, almost everyone in the United States has a medical cannabis program or low THC or adult use. I think, for the exception of maybe just we're down to 2 states, I believe, that don't have anything. The Cannabis Regulators Association's website, and they actually have a wonderful diagram where you can get updated on what's going on in each market. What we're seeing the shift towards is federal alignment, which is what we're going to be discussing today, and then scalable compliance programs. And so we're going to be really talking about what operators need to start preparing for this next chapter and future chapters.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go ahead, Alex, I think for this next piece, we're going to do a 2025 recap and a little bit of a 2026 recap because we are now at the end of January, which is really mind-blowing to me. But if you could just give an update on basically what has really happened in these last 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, there's 2 real big things that happened. The first one was at the end of the shutdown, the government added on a rider, as they call it, to the continuing resolution, which is what was holding up the reopening of the government. It was a ban on, well, it's more accurately described as a redefinition of hemp. Right. So hemp had an arbitrary definition in the 2018 Farm Bill, which is 0.3% THC. That gave rise to the hemp industry and was the foundation of really how to differentiate between intoxicating hemp and non intoxicating hemp. That was the real purpose behind it. Things got crazy with the intoxicating hemp. And that's where I think the lawmakers decided, okay, we're going to redefine hemp. And what they did is instead of being 0.3% THC across the board, it changed it to 4 milligrams per package, which just
Per
changes
container, yeah.
per containers, which just changes everything. And really, they gave them a year to figure this out. And there's obviously, we'll discuss the potential outcomes, but it's really going to change really almost 100% of the hemp operations out there on how they operate, how they produce, if they can even produce. A lot of the intoxicating hemp that was really getting big is now at an interesting point because they have to reevaluate how to go forward. That was the first big thing that happened in November. And then the executive order heard around the world there. A lot of confusion about this. Oh my gosh, so much confusion about
A
this.
lot of confusion.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So the executive order summarized is essentially the president signed an executive order to expedite the current rescheduling process, which was the right move because there's a lot of argument or discussion about what building up to it. What does this executive order look like? Is he just going to sign something that says reschedule it by order of presidential decree? That would have likely ended up in the courts. Honestly, probably wouldn't have passed muster with the courts. But this is the right move in my mind. So this actually is done legally the correct way. And this comes from the prior administration that started this process and basically restarted the process. The new administration came in and there was a lot of confusion, especially around the DEA, the head of the DEA. There's a lot of delay on bringing the new person in. I think there's some back and forth on who it should be. And for a lot of reasons, including that, this rescheduling process just basically stalled. And what happened with this executive order, as of now, not much. Currently, they did, from when I last checked, they did get a new DEA head. I believe she is in the process of getting approved by the Senate. And she has shown signs of supporting a rescheduling process. So the the executive order, good news to move the rescheduling process. But as of now, as the recording, nothing of substance, but a
Yeah.
lot of potential.
But things could change, obviously. This recording's gonna come out. This is gonna come out live next week, and then someone could watch this
Yes.
6 months, 8 months, a year later, and everything's gonna be completely
Oh,
different
I'm
from our conversation that we're having. But one of the things I don't think is gonna change is the federal implementation and the roadmap, start that alignment with federal regulations.
yeah.
At the end of the day, that is never gonna hurt you whatsoever. So I think if anything, these are some really good best practices, and we'll like dive into why it's really important and what it's gonna set you up for in the future. And this process, I'm referring to it as a process for rescheduling because it has to go through a process and it has to be finalized and have all these moving pieces. This could take 4 years. Some people are hoping it's gonna take a year, and it could take a year. It could also get dragged out for 2 to 3 years. I don't know if there's gonna be lawsuits around it or any kind of injunctions that are gonna get filed. So, like similar with the hemp ban, people are filing injunctions. They're trying to get more time. They're trying to extend it for hemp operators. I feel like for myself, being in the regulated cannabis industry, it's always been so much uncertainty for the last 16 years of my career. I feel like I've done nothing but deal with uncertainty in the industry, and this is just another feather in my cap of uncertainty that's happening right now. And I'm sure for you, it's the same thing, right? We've always dealt with uncertainty.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, there's a lot of unknowns in this industry, and it relies on politics and bureaucrats. And that's where we're currently are, at a different step and stage than when we started, but definitely some
Yeah.
similar.
Well, and I also think too that the rescheduling is signaling for future descheduling, right? I think it's the natural step. I just didn't see it going to full descheduling right out of the gate. And I think this is a baby step that the government is taking. And actually, a little bit later on, I'm going to talk about why it's a good thing for operators and how it gives cannabis operators a little bit of breathing room and kind of my craziness and my thoughts behind why I think it's gonna give people a little breathing room.
Yeah.
Um, and for this pivotal moment that we're having is we're gonna start to see this regulatory tone shift. We're already starting to see posturing from states. I try to watch all the different regulators, and on LinkedIn, a lot of the regulatory agencies have their own LinkedIn page, or you'll see these directors of that regulatory agency, or you'll see posts coming out from CANRA, and I'm watching what's happening in my own state, and I see people, like, posturing even what's going on in Virginia. We're getting ready for the adult use application round that's gonna be coming up here in Virginia, and hemp operators can actually convert over to a marijuana license and do a full conversion, and to me, that's signaling you can convert over to cannabis and leave the hemp side if you want, and I think even in Colorado, depending on where this hemp ban goes, all of a sudden hemp could be regulated under the marijuana enforcement division like we are on the marijuana side. I try to use the word cannabis as much as I can, but on the regulatory side, it's referred to as marijuana. I think if that hemp ban, if it doesn't get taken off the table, then I suspect we're going to see it get regulated like marijuana is in Colorado, and every state is going to be different with that. And so I think too, with what comes with these next chapters and looking a little bit into the crystal ball, there's really gonna be less tolerance for gray areas in the future. Right now, we do have a little bit of a high tolerance for gray areas depending on what states. I know people feel like we're overregulated or we're heavily regulated, but I feel like the bar is actually pretty low for where we're at right now, and that we really haven't even experienced that high bar yet, which is why I named this episode Raising the Bar, because I think that's what's gonna happen. So I wanna, like, talk about rescheduling and what it actually means for compliance, and if you could go ahead and just help listeners out, and what does rescheduling do, and what does it not do?
Well, that's a big one. I'll do my best, and obviously we'll have a discussion here back and forth on
Yeah.
it. But this is, gosh, even when the prior administration started this, there was a lot of people online, and he legalized weed, and that's definitely not what
Yeah.
most people aren't fully versed in. It's called the Controlled Substance Act, and what that does is it creates different schedules for different types of drugs. And the most restrictive schedule is Schedule 1. And this is supposed to mean that this particular drug has no medical benefits. And that's where cannabis has been put unjustly, and has caused has created a lot of very unfair situations for consumers, patients, really everybody who wants to consume the plant. But the biggest thing that it did, the biggest tragedy of the Schedule 1 position was that it really prevents medical research. And then you have to have a very specific DEA special permit to actually study. Ole Miss, Mississippi University, was one of the few that had that exception, and they've been growing, I think, 40 plus years.
Oh, yeah, a long time.
So there's very few entities that have actually been able to study this plant. What changing or rescheduling this plant or the product does is it opens up a few things. The biggest one in my mind is medical research.
Yeah.
So once it gets rescheduled, and again, we have to go through the full process, as you mentioned, monkey wrenches could fall in and delay, and who knows. But once it gets formally rescheduled, what's going to happen is there's going to be a mad rush for new drug applications. This is probably the biggest opportunity that I see, especially business wise. I think there was at least 100 or so about a couple of years ago. So I think there's maybe 200 or more in this country businesses that want to create a new drug. And so that means they're going to have to isolate different compounds, whatever it is, the specific cannabinoids, whatever it, and they're going to create a new drug, potentially delivery system for this plant. This will create over-the-counter prescription drugs. So essentially, this is going to be the drugs that you see at a CVS or a Walgreens or a different drugstore, essentially. That's the big opportunity. What it doesn't do is it does not make cannabis legal. It actually keeps the state operations are still going to be bucking federal law.
Yep.
Going to still be illegal because what it does is that Schedule 3 requires it is a prescription drug, and that then there's federal requirements to handle and transport and et cetera. And these state operations are not meeting those criteria, and just selling it to the public is still bucking those rules. So essentially, it's not going to make what the states are doing legal in the federal sense. The big thing I think for operators is that it will remove this weird rule that 280E, they call it, is for taxation, and that has Schedule 1 implications. So basically, it's going to it will relieve some tax pressure, specifically on the dispensaries.
The tax burden that they're under.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, these operators, they're getting taxed at like 70% or higher tax rate. They can't write off normal things like a regular business does. I think that's only cost of goods sold, but they can't really
transportation.
They can't really take things off that just other regular businesses do. And it just becomes such a tax burden. I have a client, I think they're paying like $30,000 a month in taxes for a dispensary.
Yeah, you can't write off employee just by tenders. You can get very specific. Though that rule is the transportation and distribution of Schedule 1. So production, the cultivations and manufacturers don't actually have the same burden.
They don't.
It's mostly dispensaries. And so that's the biggest benefit. But in my mind, it's also, state operators, there's a little bit of a benefit there, but you're also opening up to new competition. You're opening up to competition that's, again, is going to end up in a Walgreens or some local drugstore, which, it is going to open up. It's going to create a more competitive market for cannabis operators.
Yeah, it was specifically on the medical side.
Yeah.
Not the adult use side. I would also say what rescheduling does, it signals federal acknowledgement of cannabis legitimacy. It also gives operators that breathing room I was talking about in the beginning of the show, and that more or less when it goes from a Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, it's a mixed bag out there. I say half the industry is against it and half the industry is for it, and everybody has their reasons. A lot of people are against big pharma and all this stuff, but here's the reality. Schedule 3 gives everyone in the industry breathing room right now for the government, one, to get everything figured out. And let's just say descheduling, I'll just make up a number. Descheduling doesn't happen for 5 years. They're not going to deschedule for 5 years. So cannabis operators across the country will be able to catch their breath. I think dispensary operators are going to be saving up around $300,000 to $400,000 a year that they're going to be getting back in their pockets once the rescheduling goes to 3 and it's finalized with taxes. And so they could be saving a lot of money, getting that money back in their pockets. But also, it's going to still keep up a barrier for the big guys to come in. A lot of the big players, like in tobacco and alcohol, even though a lot of people will say some of these people are already in the industry, but they don't have both feet in. They might be dipping their toes in. We have big cannabis operators and MSOs and all these people we think that have tons of money. But if you really look at the big picture, that's just really the macro, right? Of what we all experience in this bubble we call the cannabis industry. But if you scale that back and peel all that layer back and open those floodgates to now where all these people that have way more money than what we've seen in the industry and all that capital comes flooding in, it's going to be knocking people out of business. It's going to create really tough competition because the bar is going to get raised and people are going to have federal alignment. And if you're going to be going over state lines and all these things, and Alex is going to talk about it later, I want you to be thinking about everything that Alex is going to be sharing later, like how that's going to raise the cost of running your business. What if all of a sudden we're on a federal playbook in 5 years and it's all the same packaging and labeling across state lines, and we're shipping across state lines, and we have one centralized system that's tracking for recalls and all these things. And I want people to think outside the box, get outside of our bubble that we're all in and the cannabis industry, and looking at the FDA and all these other industries and how they're regulating food and prescription drugs and supplements and all these other things, that we're going to now be subjected to that in the future. I'm not saying right now, but I want people to start thinking about this and trying to get an idea what that will look like. And so I feel like right now we should be really taking this time to get caught up and decide, like, where do you want to go? What is your future in cannabis? Are you going to sell your business? Are you going to get out? Is there an end game? Are you going to try to compete with the big guys? And that cost of compliance is going to go up, and so is the bar that's going to get raised. And Alex, feel free to jump in.
No, everything you said is accurate. And I think for your listeners, I think the real thing I would expand on is the difference between rescheduling and descheduling. This gets really in the weeds, pun intended. This is what rescheduling moves it up and down the schedule list, right? There's 1 to 6, I believe, schedules. But the real solution here, and as an advocate, and I think most of the people in the industry would agree, especially once they know all the details, is descheduling is legalization that people want to see. I think
Yes.
the people the stakeholders in this industry that I think you and I care about, most people care about, the customer, the patient, the small businesses, those are going to benefit the most in descheduling. So descheduling means you're going to remove it off that list completely. And that really takes an act of Congress, right? And the reason why alcohol and tobacco are off of the controlled substance list is because they have a federal framework that they work with.
Yeah.
Well, there's multiple ways to skin the cat. This is where it gets really important on how the scheduling goes, because the big players are standing there. You know, you got the big beverage, tobacco, alcohol, businesses.
And why, and tell everybody why they're not coming in right now.
There's a lot of reasons, because it is still federally illegal. And to your point is that this rescheduling will give the operators a chance. It is going to be a little hint of, hey, you guys need to step your game up because the big players are going to come in. In the rescheduling that's going to happen very likely is the big beneficiary is big pharma and really big banks. That's another thing that hopefully this is a catalyst for, is normalizing kind of banking for the industry. That still is an act of Congress that needs to happen. But big pharma is going to be the big winner in this, right? And when it goes descheduling, that is when all those barriers are now gone and the big players can come in. So everything you were saying is right.
Yeah.
This is almost like a warning shot. Hey, we're getting close to federal legalization. And if you're going to want to compete with the big guys, you're going to have to step your game up.
Yeah. And then also, too, I want to reiterate what it doesn't do. And I know Alex gave some great examples, but it's not going to simplify compliance. This is rescheduling. It does not simplify compliance. It's not going to remove the state oversight we talked about. Everything continues in everybody's state as it is now. Everyone's regulated by their state. Everyone still has to follow all the rules and regulations. In the state, we still have states coming online. Like I said, Virginia's getting ready to go adult use. I think they just announced winners for applications in Rhode Island, at the Virgin Islands. We're going to have all these operators that are going to start building out their facilities. We have a lot of social equity license winners in Maryland that are in their planning phases right now to launch, getting their facilities ready to launch in Maryland. And then also we have DC. We have a lot of these licensed medical operators in DC. They're still trying to find locations, get ready to launch their facility. They're still raising capital out there. It's really wild. It's that what it's always been in the cannabis industry is we're rowing the boat while we're building the boat. It's that I feel like I feel like that's all it's ever been is like we're actually like trying to row the boat and build it at the same time. And not only do we have to go through that as stakeholders, but also the regulators are going through it. The states they're also building the boat while they're rowing it too. I kind of want to run on to the next section, which is why operators must be proactive now because compliance is shifting from where we have to go from being that reactive to the proactive. For a very long time, at least I feel like in new states, everyone's really good at being proactive. And then once people settle in, they get like in this habit and, oh, we'll see the regulator. We'll get an inspection once a year. Maybe we won't get an inspection. And now we're just going to get a little complacent. And now we're seeing a lot of violations. I can't remember the number. I think it was around $10 million in violations were handed out in 2025. We're seeing violations, which it's, I know a lot of people might see that as a negative thing, but what it's telling me is that they're out there and they're inspecting the facilities and regulations. The regulatory framework is working, right? If people are breaking the rules, they're getting fined for it. That's why those systems are set up in place. And when you get that $40,000, recently I saw a $40,000 one happen in Colorado. Imagine if that was the FDA. Alex, how much would it cost if the FDA gave out a violation?
It was likely 100% your business down.
Pretty much goodbye and you're out of business. Though 40,000 could shut somebody down right now, I would definitely say that as well, depending on the size of your business. And this operator had multiple licenses. It wasn't just a one store operator, but you think OSHA violations are expensive or your enforcement in your state, those violations are expensive? Wait till the federal government gets in here and the FDA and you're just like, "Oh, I'm just gonna sit around and wait for the FDA to come in and tell me what I'm doing wrong." They just don't operate like that. That's just not the world they operate in.
The other side of that is not just the enforcement, it's the opportunity, right?
Yeah.
You don't get these certifications, you're not going to be in the right position to seize the opportunity. The immediate opportunity for rescheduling is to work with one of these new drug companies that actually gets approved. And if it gets approved by the FDA, you cannot work with one of these businesses unless you're FDA approved for whatever you're doing. It's very likely going to be pharmaceutical grade FDA GMP compliance, which is more than any operator really is familiar with.
Yeah.
So much that's required there. So you're going to leave a lot on the table if you're not taking advantage and not upping your game and not maturing, because there's going to be a lot of opportunities that just won't be there for you if you don't decide to up your game.
Yeah, and also too, I think for the adult use market and the medical market will, I believe, look different and how they're regulated.
Oh,
I'm not 1,000% sure of how it's going to get mapped out, but I do believe medical is probably going to be the most stringent, I would guess.
It will be. Yeah, the FDA has 3 real levels of, they call it GMP, and I'm jumping into GMP here, but they have 3 levels of GMP compliance, and the highest is the pharmaceutical GMP. Then you have dietary supplements, which New York has chosen to enforce on the extraction facilities. And then there's food grade FDA, and that obviously will apply to the edibles and whatnot.
Yep, consuming.
And then there's additional thing, it's called GACP, which is good agricultural and collection practices. And that at minimum is what the cultivations will apply to the cultivations. And it could even be more stringent than the FDA. They could require pharmaceutical grade compliance. If you're working with a pharmaceutical company, it would make sense.
Yeah.
To the point, your point is we don't know exactly where these rules and criteria will land, but pretty sure that one or multiple of these sets of criteria will apply to all businesses.
I'll also throw out a couple other items out there too, where I definitely foresee some overlapping is when it comes to agriculture, which is the cultivation of cannabis in the future, is once again, the FDA can be involved. The USDA, I'm sorry, I'm thinking the USDA is what I was thinking. And because of the pesticide application logs, the USDA has some regulations around applying chemicals to plants. And then also we have the EPA. Right now, the EPA is not really coming into these facilities. We do have EPA regulations that we do have to follow around worker protection standards for any kind of agricultural business. And then also we're going to see the Department of Ag is going to start coming in. It's also right now, it's individual states, like in Colorado, our Department of Ag is heavily involved in the cannabis industry. They actually built out an entire marijuana side, and then when hemp came online, they built out an entire hemp program. So hemp operators and then people who cultivate marijuana, they get regularly visited and inspected by the Department of Ag in Colorado. But I see that going more on a federal level where they're gonna be involved in all the states. So those are some of the federal standards that you can look for in the future as well. So I kinda wanna talk about the path towards descheduling
Or
and, like, why this matters, and then what descheduling would unlock.
yeah, that's a big one too.
I'm giving you all the big
No,
ones
the good
today.
one that was said.
You're smarter than me, so
No,
I
no, that well, I've talked a lot about this, so no, it's definitely a subject I'm familiar with, and this is the one thing, and I know a lot of very smart people as well, and I think some really good ideas on how to do this. Because one of the things that I think is lacking at a federal level, and I think what cannabis can do, lead the way, is most countries have, like Canada, Australia, Israel, it's on and on, have China, have a part of the government that helps manage natural health products, right? And that's more whole plants medicine, right? Natural medicines. And medicine is a big buzzword because that's where the FDA and then what's a medicine versus a drug, et cetera, it gets real wonky. But as the FDA goes and pharmaceuticals, that's a single molecule, right? So what they do is when they create a drug, it's one thing, right? And it's in a pill. It could be CBD or it could be whatever it is. It could be 100 or so different cannabinoids or flavonoids or whatever it is in the plant. They could isolate that and use it as a drug. And that's very likely what they're going to do. Israel's doing a great job. They're actually shrinking cancer, which is amazing with their testing. So obviously rescheduling, that's where this is going to be. This is the big potential, right? Single molecule, what can it do? Help you sleep, whatever, skin conditions, sleeping, cancer, all those things that we want and help with. That's going to go on the pharmaceutical side. Descheduling though, way I see it and some really smart people see it is there should be a separate entity in the health and human services that helps regulate whole plant medicine. The
Yeah.
FDA is not good at that. And so one of the ideas is that there will be a natural health products administration alongside the FDA that will allow doctors to prescribe whole plant medicine
Yeah,
over just pharmaceuticals. Give an alternative. I think most people want that.
they
Uh,
do. I like a lot of people want the whole plant
right.
medicine.
So I think so that if I had any type of influence or power as the descheduling come about, that's what I would
Yeah.
is have a separate whole plant path for medicines for the doctors, etc. That being said, that's one thing that the entire country could benefit from. But then on the state adult use, what would happen is that the restrictions would go away from the feds and they would likely just let the states regulate themselves. Some states could be dry states, right? They can
Yeah.
choose to not have adult use and that would be up to them. But it would take away all the federal red flags, the lending issues. It would normalize banking. It would,
Capital would start pouring
oh,
in to the
exactly.
industry. Like right now, the biggest, and Alex and I, we do projects all across the country. And the number one issue of everything that we see that our clients or people that, the leads that we get or people that we're talking to is they're coming up against raising capital. It seems to be the number one struggle
Oh,
is
gosh.
raising capital.
Oh, yeah. Lending and normal banks or normalizing banking for this industry would be a game changer. Then the big thing that is going to happen with descheduling, it is going to be interstate commerce and
Yeah.
international commerce. This is big. And this is where the compliance piece comes in. And this is where the GMP, because it gets real wonky. There is international trade for cannabis right now. I believe Canada is actually producing about 50%. They are overproducing in that country. So they're selling it against Israel, most of the EU countries. You got, I believe, South Africa, Australia. Those are going to be the first main players really in the international space. And they have GMP standards. Each country sets these GMP standards. And honestly, GMP can be thrown around. It is very confusing. We just mentioned the FDA GMP, but you could set your own good manufacturing practices, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's be a test. You pass this test with lack of contamination or whatever THC thresholds. They could set arbitrary numbers like that for GMP. But what is likely going to happen is those series of FDA GMP standards alongside another set of standards we haven't brought up, which is quality management systems. And quality management systems, if you want to get any of those FDA, if you want to get certified in any of those standards, you have to have a quality management system now. And those quality management systems have a set of international standards called ISO. And their quality management standards are called ISO 9001. There's a whole lot of ISO standards out there.
They have them for testing facilities.
Yeah.
Actually, right now, a lot of testing labs across the country for cannabis actually have to get
17,000
isn't it 170205 or something like that?
17,000. Yeah.
And so they have to get certified, the labs.
So there's a lot of ISO. ISO is like the international business standards, and ISO 9001 is really the heart of it. And it is essentially quality management system is plan, do, check, act, right? Because the continuous improvement system that has a lot to do with documentation and inspecting your processes at different stages of the process. And so that's what you're going to need. You're going to need a quality management system, and that's going to give you the foundation for these GMP standards. And that will allow you, when it comes to it, to sell to different states.
Yeah.
Sell to different countries. And this is the big thing. If you're not ready, to your point, Jenny, earlier, this is the warning sign. Things are going to start moving. This could start going to a federal level in the very near future. And if you don't have a quality management system or are prepared to get GMP certified, the moment that they allow interstate and international commerce, you're falling behind. And you're going to very likely be outcompeted.
Yeah.
Businesses that are.
And I had a guest on a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about automation, and he had brought up a really good point, is that with the future of descheduling and rescheduling, if your manufacturing facility is not using any kind of automation equipment, you're not going to make it, because there are people who are manufacturing products, whether, let's just say we move out of the cannabis industry and look at other industries, co-packers that co-pack and put together people's products for them, or even manufacturing facilities that are creating products. They all have some type of automation equipment in their facility, right? They're not just sitting there and someone's got the little squeeze thing and they're filling the vape carts. They're not hand pouring gummies. They're just not doing it. I don't know what's going to happen with craft, like if the craft model is going to survive or not. Maybe he's right and it will go to full automation. But I do know we have big alcohol and we have little alcohol. We have craft beer. And so will the craft thrive? Just to move us along, I want to go through what are the GMP requirements. I know we already discussed the different categories that GMP gets broken into, but if we could talk about the requirements were traceability, documented processes, and all those things.
So like I said, really, GMP, I'm going to fold in some of the ISO stuff into this because it's easier.
Yeah.
Like I said, ISO 9001, you got to have a quality management system. And in that quality management system, and one of the things I've seen, every business I've worked with has needed help with the documenting in this space. And so you need a solid document management system, which means that you have version control. You're tracking what versions that you've made, what's changed between those versions. You need to have control over what is the active version and be able to disseminate that to your employees and not have the inactive or superseded documents mixed in there. Because most of the time I see these businesses, it's like, I got 3 versions in my shared folder and another one in a different folder and you can't have that.
Story of my life.
Well, it's boring and not sexy at all, but that's one of the big things that I think most businesses really need a good system for, and it's document management. Traceability, that's simple. That's one of the things this industry actually has a decent grasp on with the metric system and the state requirements. But you need to be able to identify batches that the production is that both the cultivation and production yields. You need to make sure you know where it came from and be able to pull those products from that specific batch if any serious adverse effect or complaint happens.
Yeah.
Traceability is important. You do need good record keeping, right? And what are the major record keeping is the sanitation and hygiene or all those things, clean and up to date on whatever the maintenance needs to be. The big thing too is equipment,
Oh, yeah.
preventative maintenance, right? So how are you maintaining your equipment? Are you documenting that? And one of the big pieces of a quality management system that's really the foundation is in all these systems, what you do is you set your threshold of acceptable quality, whatever that may be. And cooking is temperature. Things need to be cooked at this temperature, stored at this temperature, etc. And so what you do is once you identify, hey, we have these acceptable thresholds, once you fall out of them, you have to go through what's called a CAPA, or corrective and preventative action plan. And you need to document these things. So those are the foundation of QMS. GMP builds on top of that, right?
Yeah.
Additional requirements for recalls, for adverse effect reporting, for in-process inspection, HACCP, hazard analysis, and critical control plan for extraction, for your cooking in your kitchen. What are the points where things can go wrong, where things contaminated? How are you identifying them, and how are you reporting them if and when it goes wrong? And if something goes wrong, guess what? They go back into your CAPA.
I'd like to also chime in and just bring up for the fact that some states are already implementing some of these GMP standards and quality management systems.
Yep.
In Colorado, of course, we were like early ones, so we didn't do it right away. But Colorado is trying to move that way in the next 5 years. That is the conversation happening in the work groups. But you look at Missouri, Ohio, what are some other states that have some QMS requirements?
New York, you have to have the FDA GMP.
Yeah.
For your kitchens, have that food GMP, and then for the extraction, they have to meet the dietary supplements GMP. Yeah, and there's some interesting things too. And a lot of the components like CAPA, some states require that, and other states give reduced testing allowance when you meet these certain quality criteria. So there's like bits and pieces in different states, but it is definitely coming. And this is the thing too, is this is part of it. Every industry has a quality management aimed at standards and best practices. That's really what hasn't been fully developed in this industry. And so it's just a matter of time that they'll start defining what those exactly are and likely requiring those systems.
And although it's not mandated everywhere, and like I said, we're seeing pieces and parts of it woven in to these regulatory frameworks in multiple states across the US, even OSHA, by the way, we're seeing as well. It becomes a competitive advantage for operators. So when it comes time to pivot or adapt, like some people who are going to be running around with their heads cut off, freaking out because they decided to wait too long or they weren't on top of it or they were going to wait. And this is very common in the cannabis industry. Let's wait and see what everybody else does. Let's just wait and see. And then you're going to be stuck in the mad rush of trying to get it done.
Right.
But there's already people that have done it. There's already people who are GMP compliant. There are already people that have full QMS systems implemented. They're fully OSHA compliant, EPA compliant. They're already doing it. And there's not much pivoting those people are going to have to do. Maybe they have to go after like required certifications, but they're going to be further along than a lot of other people.
Yeah.
So who does this impact the most? So if you could talk about, this is regarding, let's just put QMS and GMP together, just because of where we're at on time. But so who does this impact the most? Let's start with operators, and then we'll go to patients and then consumers.
Yeah. So it obviously operations, like this is a foundational piece of any operation. So this isn't a light lift, right? Because one of the biggest shifts for operators is, and I talk about this, a lot of operators that come from the black and gray market, the biggest risk in those spaces is getting caught, right? So you don't document anything. And it's just muscle memory for these businesses. Okay, you don't need to record it, then just don't, right? And so they have a lack of defensibility is what it is. And so that is going to be the major shift for them. But I will tell you, for these operators, there's multiple things that are happening. Like you're talking to states, they're upping their own standards and their requirements how to meet the criteria. And it comes down to documentation. If you don't have it, it didn't happen. And so that's a big piece, making sure that you're ahead of where the state and all the different regulators are. But that also comes down to insurance and lenders as well.
Yeah.
And this is where quality management and GMP are the coin of risk management, right? And so risk management, it's about it's about defensibility. It's about preparing for the potential worst and being able to defend if and when something goes wrong that you did everything you could. So lenders, if the lenders, if they have an option between an operator that's just getting by and doesn't have transparency in what they're doing versus a fully GMP QMS compliant business, they're going to go for that one. They're going to go for the higher compliance. So if you really want to compete for lending and financing in this space, compliance is going to be critical. And the same thing goes with insurers, right? So if you're not getting the right evidence put in place, one, you're going to get a very high premium, right? Because the only way to actually compete for fair pricing in your insurance, is information. And insurers, when they have a lack of information, they fill that space with premiums. Well, those are the big pieces right now to encourage the listener and the operator to get to mature and to keep bringing in these higher level compliance and systems, is that those critical pieces, lending and regulators and insurers, they're all going to keep asking for more and more. And if you can't keep up with your competitor, you're going to be left behind.
Yeah. I would also say for operators, you're going to have increased operational discipline, and not everybody has discipline. Let's just be honest. I wouldn't be in business as a compliance person if people had 100% discipline in this industry. So we're going to have increased discipline, right? Because now people's feet are going to be really held to the fire here, to the flame. We have the higher cost of doing business, the higher cost of compliance. We're going to have better long-term valuations for operators. And then for patients, they're going to have improved product consistency. That's what this QMS is really going to, people are going to have the right systems in place with all these standards coming in. It's going to be actually really good for someone like a medical patient, and also helping with their dosing. It's going to have increased safety for consumers and patients. We're going to have better labeling and transparency, better quality when it comes to testing product, and like just the information on the label, or just like I said, information about recalls. I did an episode last week where I talked about there's no centralized system for consultants, regulators, operators, consumers to go to and look up recalls and deal with adverse events. It's all a patchwork between every state. And then for consumers, some impacts and benefits. It's going to be national product standards. And I would have to say that's going to be good for all of us, including operators. One of the things I kind of want to talk about around interstate commerce is local versus out of state operators. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it is, again, this is reading the tea leaves a bit, because obviously
Yes,
at the
let's
federal level,
reiterate that.
yeah, things can always change. But if it takes a state right approach, which I believe likely will be the scenario, where if you don't want to sell out of state, you don't have to. And if you're just a small dispensary, that's on you. What products do you want to bring into your business? And if they're all just in-state, small batch stuff from local folks, you're just going to follow likely very similar state rules that you have now.
Yeah.
But if you want to open yourself up to the larger market, that is where you're going to have to meet these standards.
Or even regional. Think about somebody who makes salsa. There's a lot of things like in New Mexico I love. There's some brands and products like salsas and seasonings. Like I go to New Mexico, it's like I fill up a grocery bag of stuff to bring back to Colorado. I can't find it in here. So you have that local stuff that gets manufactured, but then sometimes you'll see things that might be in 3 or 4 states, more of a regional.
Right.
So there could be a regional approach with cannabis, and there could be the national approach.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
So I think preparing, we're probably going to go over today. I will say that normally I try to keep it under an hour, but we've got about 3 to 4 more sections that I really do want to cover. So preparing for GMP compliance, like what are the practical steps operators should start? And once again, like we don't really have the roadmap, but we do want to reiterate, we know that federal standards are coming. And if you are that person and you do want to take the next steps and position yourself, here are some things you can prepare for when it comes to GMP compliance or the QMS that we were talking about.
Yeah, and it all starts, ideally, you have a professional. And this is the thing, what I've found is that there is just a lack of a lot of this different types of business knowledge, right, in this industry and in these operations. And if we're talking about QMS and GMP, it really comes down to quality, right? And there's quality professionals out there in all these other industries, right? So having somebody who understands these quality standards and systems, having them review your business, right? That's just a really good start. Because if you're going to get started, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to create a QA team, a quality assurance team, right? And you're going to have people who actually know a bit about these standards. And of course, that can come through training. But first thing, you want to make sure, hey, get a gap. Where are you now? Where should you be heading?
What's a gap for people who don't know?
A gap assessment. So that's just identifying what you don't have. It's saying where you are now versus the ideal state you're trying to get to. And then creating an action plan to get there. There's going to be a lot of additional potential standard operating procedures, policies you'll need, training and the documentation associated with that. Like I said, you're going to have the right quality team in place. There's a lot of things. Again, it's a lot of documentation. Do you have the right software that can support your document management system, et cetera? And one of the big pieces too is also understanding your supply chain, right?
Yeah.
So customers, suppliers, vetting your suppliers, having supplier qualifications, understanding
Oh, yeah.
and testing inputs that are coming in. It's a high level of double checking your work. Because again, with ISO 9001, the high levels plan, do, check, act, right? So you make a plan, you do the plan, you check the plan, and then you act on your findings from the implementation. So it's a continuous improvement process. And what I'd say, don't worry about perfection. Just get started.
Yeah, I agree.
It only gets better and better. I think a lot of people get paralysis by analysis because it's like,
Oh my gosh.
you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much. Just one thing at a time. But again, there's professionals out there. And what I want people to realize too, there's a different level of cost of time and energy that needs to be put into it. But that doesn't mean the bottom line gets worse with quality systems. It actually improves both with compliance, risk, and quality. A lot of people think that these systems are money sinks. The reality, these are the systems that can keep your business alive. They're preventative from preventing bad things from happening. They're also reactive to have you have a system. So if and when the worst case scenario happens, you're reacting and you're to a plan that you've already had in place for when these things happen. I think the big thing is to remove the mindset that compliance, risk management, quality management hurt your business. They don't.
Yeah.
They only
Yeah. And I would also say too, for like smaller operators that don't want to get left behind, these small to medium size operators, family owned businesses that do want to compete, even at a craft level or regional level or even local level, you could do GMP and QMS and get yourself 90% there, especially around the GMP. You could say, you know what, we're going to table getting certified right now. We're just going to put it on hold until I have to get certified. But let me start taking all the steps and start building out the roadmap and have someone come in and do the audit and tell me, here are the things I need to do. And then you work on it for the next year and you start prepping and gearing up. So where you're like 85 to 95% there. And then, that last leg, you can get over that next hump where you're ready to have a certifying body for GMP that would come in and certify you on the GMP side. But you could there's lots of companies that work with people to get prepared for that certification. Alex and I, we work with people to get them ready for OSHA, for when OSHA actually comes in and walk through. We get people ready for QMS, and Alex helps people with GMP and get them ready for that next step for the certification. Right now, that's that breathing room that we're talking about. We have this breathing room and take advantage of it. 2026, it's like the year of action, I feel, for operators to really start saying, here's the crossroad. Am I going to go left or am I going to go right? And what path am I going to take? Which this path will now lead me to talking about exit strategy. Which, Alex, talk about exit strategy and why compliance is so important.
Oh my gosh.
And what it's in it for those who's, oh my God, I'm done. And I've had people quit the industry to saying it's too hard to keep up. I can't manage the compliance anymore. It's costing us too much. We're drowning in it. A lot of people have left because of that. It's only going to get worse. And not only that, the people who are in compliance, they might want to get out too and say, oh, we're not going to throw our hats in the ring with the big boys. So like, why is that all important, Alex?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've seen and met and worked with a lot of people in this industry, and a lot of people have a game plan, and it revolves around legalization, right? Oh, if I build a better mousetrap now, and then legalization happens, then I'm going to get bought up. And that's so significant. I know consultants that feel this way, ancillary businesses. It's just, okay, let me get a foothold here, build out this operation as well as I can. And so when the big guys come in, here's retirement. And I think that's a lot of the plan. Most operators, I think, have a vision similar to that. And so if that is the game plan, then all of what we're talking about is even more important because when it happened, there's a whole lot of things. One, when legalization happens and you're not competitive, you're not going to get bought out. They're just going to let you die on the vine. It's consolidation. They talk about what's likely we're in and likely going to happen and accelerate through descheduling is consolidation, meaning the bigger and bigger businesses are going to buy out some of the better run smaller businesses. And there's going to be less and less businesses and the bigger ones are just going to get bigger and bigger. And so if that is your game plan to get bought out by the big players, then you need to be able to defend why you won the value of your business, right? Not just your P&L, your profits and loss statements. Like you need to show this is my system. This is how it works. And these are the points that we monitor. And this is how we correct when things fall out of alignment. If you don't have any of that, then the due diligence process, even if you do get bought out, you're probably going to get undervalued, right? Because you can't justify the value with just a story, right? Plenty of businesses are doing that, but the way most businesses go into this outside this industry, it is a deep dive and it's a due diligence process of all your systems. You got to define all your systems. And if those aren't there, then either you're going to get bought out at a lower price or you're not going to get bought out at all.
What I'm hearing, which is interesting because I'm thinking about equity, like building equity in my business. You know how when you buy a house and you build equity in your house, you fix all the things up and it then becomes an investment. But you're building equity in your business by doing all these things. You're raising the valuation of your business. If you do want to get out, it's really up to you. Like you could get what you're going to get, or you can start to build this equity in your business and getting these systems set up and ready for when the market gets flooded and people want to start buying up these businesses, because we are going to see an influx of companies getting bought up. A lot of mergers and acquisitions are going to spike up. When I was thinking about the adult use side, I really want to differentiate that medical is going to look, I know how it looks now. I think it's going to be very different, completely, way even more different. Adult use is going to look way different than medical in the future. I see adult use as like these liquor stores. Are we going to be like the big Total Wine alcohol store that has 50,000 different types of alcohol in it? and we sell snacks and food and CBD beverages and all these things? Or am I going to be that like hole in the wall, five and dime liquor store on the street corner? I think it's really up to the operator, right? Where do they want to go? Who do they want to be? Are they going to be okay with just being the dispensary and try to make it and just stick in their lane in their state and not do anything else? Or do they want to build their portfolio and invest in equity in their business and try to get a big valuation and try to get out? Or do I want to go into the market and try to compete with all the big boys coming in? And so it's just, like I said, we don't really have a roadmap. We're just trying to plant seeds. We're just planting seeds for people right now. And we wanted to come on to try to be educational and try to open people's minds so people aren't in shock when things start to happen and say, "Oh my God, I didn't see this coming." That's the whole purpose. Obviously, we're probably not gonna get everything right, but I think what we can truly bet on is federal standards. That's 100% gonna happen. There's no way to get around it.
Yeah, things are going to get more difficult, and it's going to require a lot more proof and evidence. And yeah, it's going to require businesses to mature, which is there's growing pains.
Yeah, so we're just in the moment right now, and the moment now is just for people to really sit down, and even people coming online. These new states coming online, getting their facilities built out. For example, Virginia, for people who are going to be going after these adult use licenses here come July. Should I be thinking about building that kind of operation with my cultivation and manufacturing out of the gate in Virginia? I think a pharmaceutical, medical license. What did it go for, Alex, that recently sold?
Millions. Yeah.
Millions. It was like 10 million or something. That's a license recently sold in Virginia. And that's the big money we're talking about. And I guarantee they had all these standards that we're talking about and more in place in their facility. It just doesn't sell for that much if you're not federally aligned at that point.
Yeah.
And wrapping up, that you want to leave listeners.
This is a real business, and it requires real diligence. And if you have a long game of being in this industry for more than just the next year or two, it's going to require some continuous improvement. And so just embrace that. So this is only going to get more challenging. And it honestly provides an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Because if you can step your game up and you can bring in these systems, this isn't rocket surgery, right? This is growing a product and producing extract and edibles. And there's a lot of nuance to it all, obviously. But these are systems that I know most of these operators can handle, right?
Yeah.
And so if you choose to take that path of improvement, you're going to position yourself pretty good for the future.
I agree. And not to get overwhelmed about it. It is doable. That's why we're coming and talking about it. We don't want people freaking out here later on. We want, like I said, we're trying to plant seeds. We want operators to be successful in this industry. Alex and I have always been advocate for the operators out there, especially the smaller operators and the medium-sized operators who we work with. So it is, like Alex said, it's an opportunity that you can turn compliance into an asset and build that equity in your business and really be in the driver's seat of your trajectory and the future of where the cannabis industry is going. And so the time is now to really start thinking about it, preparing, getting organized. Hopefully this was helpful. I know I went a little bit over than I normally do. It's a ton of information to try to cram into 1 hour. Honestly, I think I had pages of notes that I was trying to get through. Thank you, everyone, for hanging on and listening. Alex, it's always such a joy and great to have you on and all your knowledge. And I really appreciate you coming on and helping out and contributing to the episode. And I'll have Alex's information as well in the description box. And for those who like to stream their podcast, you can listen to this episode on Apple or Spotify or wherever you like to listen. And as well, check out at Under the Microscope with Jenny on YouTube and go and subscribe to my YouTube channel. So thanks everyone for tuning in today. And thanks again, Alex.
Thank you, Jenny. Always
Yeah.
good.
Thank you.